Welcome back to the second episode of this podcast, Culturally Speaking. As always, I am your host, Shivan Gupta, accompanied by.
Hi, this is Mukesh, your co-host. So today we're going to talk about something which is culturally very much in the zeitgeist, which is uh, wealth and its connection to power or money and power. So what do you think, Yuvan? Do the two of them go together?
I think yes, while I feel money is very deeply interconnected and tied to power, I think wealth uh, sort of opens the gateways for a person to sort of invest into multiple different kinds of power, be it political power, economic power, social power, coercive power, any sort of power or concentration of power is made easier with access to wealth.
Yeah, and I think it kind of comes alive when you look at the US political situation right now. So, with the entire campaign, Trump campaign, uh, which Elon Musk funded with 200 plus $1 million, which is like significant amount of money for one person to donate to a political party, and with the same uh, kind of comes a lot of power as well, which he exercised by creating and being part of the first 6 months of Trump's administration, where he ran the Department of Governmental Efficiency, or as people called it, DOGE. And while it lasted not long because of ego issues between the two of them, I think it brought to fore the connection between wealth and power. And given the society that we live in today, where there are certain individuals who are able to garner so much wealth and therefore so much power that they have the ability to significantly alter the course for everyone else, and that's kind of little scary as well as a little how would I put it? Um, the kind of leverage that they hold on all of us and all our lives is not really advisable for any one or a few individuals to hold, right? So the question that I have is, why is it bad? I mean, what are some of the repercussions of so much power concentrated in a few people?
I believe Gabriel Alfor wrote a blog about it recently, and over there he highlighted three reasons as to why the collection of power. First, he says it is morally bad, it is personally bad, and it is instrumentally bad. And I think the last one is really important, and I think more so important for us to look at. Because what happens is when a singular entity, or like a person or an institution, gathers too much power, they sort of lower the agency of everyone else, right? Because then the way that they decide, if they decide this is right or this is the correct path for anything or anyone, that becomes the singular path. Whereas before this collectivization of power and when power was distributed, you had different people trying different strategies, different techniques to achieve any goal, right? Some would fail and some would succeed. And overall, given the failures and successes, society as a group would benefit from it because we can all learn from both the failures and the successes. What happens when there's a singular entity that sort of defines the strategy for everyone is that when they fail, everyone fails together, and no one's and as a group we're not really innovating and growing, as much. Like the failures of the people at the very top influence everyone's lives to a massive degree. And in general it leads to sort of less innovation, less creative thinking, less critical thinking, because it becomes much easier just to say, hey, look at this person, they've done so well for themselves, or look at this institution, they've done so well for themselves that we should just follow in their footsteps, and that becomes sort of like a crutch for society at large to follow.
Interesting, right? So right now we live in such times where the amount of power that a few individuals hold, whether it is political power, whether it is wealth in terms of financial wealth, whether it is influence in terms of a few people deciding where the technology and the investments in technology go towards. For example, when it comes to artificial intelligence, a Sam Altman or someone at that level, they can decide to unleash a generative AI tool, a large language model to the world without actually having guardrails around it. And because one person releases it, everyone else kind of, is also forced to release so that they can compete because all the power gets concentrated on the first movers, people who are able to garner the market share early. They tend to overshadow everyone else in this winner takes all economics that we are living through. And when you say it lowers the agency and kind of, creates a single point of failure, that is exactly the reason why um, uh, it is important that we are able to have multiple uh, uh, experiments going on at the same time and not depend on a few individuals or a few organizations to have this kind of power. It makes the overall society extremely fragile. Now, coming at it from a different lens, what does this power imbalance do when it comes to freedom of choice for everyone else?
I mean, there's just not that many choices, right? So if a singular player owns a whole market segment, well, you don't have a choice. I know. Up until recently, I would say Adobe was a big perpetrator of this because if you wanted to work in the creative industry, be it filmmaking, photography, illustration, graphic design, print, anything, you were basically stuck with using, Adobe's apps. No matter how egregious the pricing, no matter how unreliable the product, you were stuck with them. Now the market has opened up, and players such as Canva and DaVinci Resolve have sort of stepped in, and now we can really see that there is a wider sort of array of options that people have when they decide to make a graphic for an event, or they want to edit a movie, or you know even on the mobile side, right? Apps like CapCut have, I think, significantly eaten into Adobe's market share, and I think it's for the better. Adobe itself is now innovating at a much faster and much better rate than they were prior to all this competition.
Yeah, and I think the same thing happens with respect to, let's say, an Apple or a Google or a Microsoft when they look at garnering a huge market share for their products. The moment you see significant number of competitors coming in and attacking from multiple different perspectives, suddenly you find that these large organizations wake up and are able to do a lot more innovation from that point as well. I remember you mentioning about the fact that uh, um, Nintendo is kind of going backwards towards proprietary systems rather than universal
Yeah,
systems as well.
yeah. So with their recent Nintendo Switch 2 launch, we have recently found out that the USB-C connector on the Switch and the dock is proprietary, right? So I mean, which in of itself sounds redundant, right? USB stands for Universal Bus Connector, and in an environment where a lot of these companies are moving towards non-proprietary and more open source, connectors, especially with respect to USB-C, given Apple's forced usage of USB-C globally because of the EU. This is, I think, a very disheartening step by Adobe, where they've modified. I saw a video where someone called it tactical laziness, where they chose not to implement the full USB standard, and they only allowed devices that are sort of licensed to Nintendo and their protocols to be able to use that USB bus. And I think it's very concerning because we've only very recently gotten to a point where the right to repair movement has taken off, and it's such a pro. It is becoming a pro consumer market, but a market leader like Adobe coming in and changing that, it could set precedent for Xbox or Nintendo or PlayStation or Microsoft or Apple to start doing the same. And it's not to say they don't already do it. Some of them do, but I think it's a step in the wrong direction, especially when we have companies like Framework doing such incredible work in making non-proprietary open source hardware.
And we just had Apple move from USB, from their Lightning to USB-C finally as the standard, uh, piece of hardware for all their devices. And we have Nintendo moving back.
I
And
wouldn't.
now,
I wouldn't count Apple. I wouldn't give them too many praises because their implementation of USB-C also leaves a lot and a lot to be desired. They're also only implementing not the full spec, even on their top end devices, which I think is reprehensible. If you're charging top dollar for any product, a hardware product especially, I would expect the full USB-C spec to be on the product.
interesting. So coming back to the concept of wealth and power together, right? So you mentioned the article and said that there are three ways why concentration of wealth is not right. So one of them that you talked about is morally it is not right. So can you expand on that a little bit?
I think that's a very tough conversation because on one hand, it is the morally right thing is that people should be free and equal. Someone having power over someone else makes them less free and less equal. While on the flip side, if the person has accumulated the wealth and power through legitimate means by being good at something and providing a service or a product that the market needs, it also feels morally injustifiable to sort of punish them for having that power. I do believe that there are right and wrong ways to use power. You can use power for good, but you can just as well use it for evil. But I think it's not such a black and white issue, and that's where I think there's a big legally and morally gray area, right? So where do we draw the line uh, on what power is morally acceptable to use and what is not? I don't think we can. We just have to sort of assess each situation as it comes.
Interesting, because I follow a YouTube channel called Gary's Economics, and one of the things that he's been talking about is the fact that the way things are moving, what it is doing is it is squeezing the middle class. So there are a lot of people at the bottom of the economic inequality, and there are a very few people who are getting more and more richer and wealthier and wealthier. And he talks about the importance of taxing these wealthy individuals such that uh, overall economic inequality reduces. But again, he also talks about the fact that the same thing that you talked about, right? So where do we draw the line? I mean, and it is not as simple as just tax the wealthy and everything is going to be all right. It is not just about taxing the wealthy. It is also about economic redistribution of both wealth as well as power. And one of the things that we see with the entire AI movement is the fact that more and more entrepreneurs and people who are running their own businesses can deploy artificial intelligence, robotics in their businesses and overall reduce the cost and increase their ability to generate a profit at the cost of people whom are being let go. I mean, we are every week there is a news of a large corporate letting go of 8,000 people, Microsoft letting go of 8,000 people, TCS letting go of 12,000 people, a lot of other companies. For example, I know that McKinsey decided that they are going to use artificial intelligence, and that is going to significantly reduce the number of people that they employ. So it is, instead of going towards a world where the inequality of wealth and power are reducing, we are going towards a world where both inequality in terms of wealth as well as in terms of power is getting more and more polarized and more widen. And
Yeah, yeah. I believe like we're going backwards from the post World War II era of taxation and government systems. I I remember reading about this in history textbooks, like how in post-war U.S. and U.K. and most of Europe, really, the wealth the wealthy were taxed immensely high, and the middle class really enjoyed the benefit. And the redistribution of wealth after the war made everyone's quality of life much better. People were generally happier. People were able to afford housing, food. There were not to say there weren't poor people in the world. The global South was very much maligned in the process of this economic upheavement, but it really shows us that yes, taxing the wealthy and taxing wealth works. But then, we had people like Thatcher and Reagan, come in with their economic policies to help the wealthy. And since then, it seems that we've just been going backwards, back to the Middle Ages, back to, Renaissance and pre-Renaissance, back to, feudalism by the looks of the wealth gap right now. For example, right
Yeah.
now in the U.S., the wealth gap is worse than it was during the French Revolution in France. I mean that's something like that's that's a bit awe-inspiring, really. That we managed to let it get this bad.
Hmm. Interesting. So that begs the question, is there a way or is there an ideal balance between economic and political power? Is there a way, is there a solution for this? I don't know if there is a easy solution to this.
Um, yeah. So there needs to be a balance of economic power, political power. There's a reason like political power is split into multiple branches, right? You have the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive, and the fourth power, which is the media. And what's happening now is because of this the sheer amount of wealth that these our billionaires have sort of created, they're able to buy each and every one of these power stratas, which were codified to sort of keep each other in check. Let's take Musk for an example. For example, right, he is able to build enough economic capital to purchase media. So he purchased Twitter, so he can control discourse on Twitter, and then he used the money from and then he used the excess money to buy political power. And using the political power, he put pressure on the judiciary and legislative powers. Because in order to have the political power, he needed the legislative on his side anyway, right? So it just shows how easy it is for a political system to sort of delve into stuff like clientelism, corruption, kleptocracies, and revolving doors. And this happened in a mere, what, 9, 10, 11 months, right? And it is fearful, especially in terms of media houses, because if I'm not wrong, uh, most global big media houses are owned, at least in significant part, by billionaires or by governments. So they either state owned or billionaire controlled to a certain extent, which I think is really dangerous. I think what we need is an open source or publicly funded, media outlet.
Uh, so whether it is social media, whether it is traditional media, I think the moment you have media which is run like a business, which people expect a return on investment, automatically they become dependent on advertising revenue. They become dependent on sponsors. They depend on these ultra rich corporations to fund them, and therefore kind of reduce their ability to provide independent opinion. There are very few media outlets today which can truly be called independent, and who have a voice which is not necessarily controlled by either, as you said, a government or a private entity. And that is, I think, a big issue. And I feel that this entire process of the wealthy individuals or corporations buying media started when the media business was privatized, and we started having these 24-hour news channels and these and they had to fill something, and for those 24 hours. how much news can you have around the world, which is kind of going on and on and on, and which also meant that they started hijacking hijacking attention through multiple tactics, which kind of gave them power over the larger public. And once they were able to sway opinions, and then which you know, depending upon who owned the media, they decided kind of, which way to sway the opinions, and which kind of, in the longer term has led to a situation where there are very clearly defined media outlets. So, for example, there are some which are clearly left leaning, there are some which are clearly right leaning, there are some which are kind of, how do I put it? Uh, to say the least, very individualistic, opinionistic kind of, leaning as well. So kind of, creates all sorts of issues. Now, given that this is the situation, so what can people like you and me do to regain some sort of agency, and to regain some sort of freedom, and to kind of resist all this power play that is happening all around us?
I mean, there's a very simple answer, but it's not really realistic. The simplest answer is to stop engaging. But that's just, not a very realistic option for most people.
So in my case, I do, because partially because I stopped watching TV news, reading newspapers like 12 years back. I've not watched a TV
Yeah,
channel, a news channel
but
in
the
the last
fact,
12 years.
yeah, but the fact remains that you, at some level, you need to be aware of what's happening around you. Otherwise, the government still do go unchecked. Even more so, I do agree that right now they are going a bit unchecked. But if people just stop paying attention to media, it would go completely unchecked, right? And the issue, lies in the kind of monetization strategies a lot of these media platforms have, where they are monetized. At least all the nouveau media, like your Facebooks, your Twitters, your Instagrams, your Reddits, your whatever, is monetized by interactions, right? So, and the easiest way to get interactions is to breed conflict, and to breed, very highly opinionated people against each other. That's one, and the second is to keep feeding people posts that they will vehemently agree with, sort of creating what we, discussed in the last episode about these media bubbles. And what we need to sort of figure out is what is an alternative way that we can monetize media outlets such that they don't have to rely on, things like interaction. Now, we used to have one way of doing it, which is a subscription service. You paid, whatever, $10-$20 a month, and you'd get a newspaper delivered to your, door once or twice a day. But, people don't want print anymore. They want it digitally, and people are less likely to pay for subscriptions, and I don't blame them. Subscriptions have gotten out of hand. The other day, I was at the comics convention in Singapore, and I saw someone, I think LG, saying that you can pay a subscription service for a fridge, and it like locks you in for 7 years, so you end up paying $5,000 for a completely average fridge. So I don't blame the public for being tired of subscriptions. But I do feel that there are some outlets which are, playing with alternative monetization sources. For example, Ground News is one. So they work on a subscription basis. They're an app that you can just subscribe to, and they're not a media outlet per se, but they are a media feeding device, is what I would call them. So they would just provide you different news topics, and they will show who's reporting on it and which outlets are reporting on it from which political perspective, who owns the media outlets, and it then allows you to read multiple articles and then form your own opinion. Now, this is not a perfect system because it takes a lot of agency and effort from the user's end, and not everyone has access to that kind of time and effort, base their decisions and opinions on. But I feel it is moving a step in the right direction. But this also, again, is a show of economic power and economic privilege, because the people who can't afford, the subscription service are kind of, locked out from the access to this stuff, which is,
Interesting.
we're coming back in a full circle about, economic capital and the importance of economic capital.
Interesting, because as of today, I think Do Radio was launched, and again, this is this is a an idea which they want to make sure that this is a radio channel that is available 24/7, and uh, is owned by the public, and they want to ensure that they are able to stay away from all the influence that the corporates and the high net worth individuals have on the media network. So if anyone, a big shout out to the Do Radio team for putting together a radio channel for the public, by the public. Uh, Coming back to organizations or businesses, I think we are seeing exactly the same dynamic being played out in the corporate environment as well. Suddenly, you find that the CEO salaries have skyrocketed in such huge, humongous number that there are organizations where a CEO's salary is like 300 times the salary of the lowest paid employee, or and even 30 times the median employee of the organization, median salary of the organization as well. So you suddenly find CEOs who have multi-million dollar salaries, whereas their their salaries are growing at much faster clip than the salaries of their overall employee base. So I was watching a US senator talking to people, talking to CEOs, where they asked the CEO salary grew by 50% year on year in the last 3 years, and the entire organization's average salary grew by 1%. So how do you justify that? And that also creates a lot of problems in the longer run for organizations as well, because then you are subjected to what people refer to as hippo, which is highest paid person's opinion in the organization. So they tend to, dominate the discussions. They tend to bring their own biases. They tend to bring their own um, uh, egos into decision making, and that kind of, in the longer run, only hurts the business and the organization at large, rather than help the organization. So which again, shows the fact that businesses or corporates are also a microcosm of the larger society that we live in, and the larger trends that play out in the larger society typically end up playing out in in the smaller microcosm of organizations as well. And if you really wanted to ensure that something like that doesn't happen, or it doesn't impact, it takes additional intentional effort on the part of a leader to kind of make sure that the hippo part doesn't play out. So which means that the leader needs to speak at the end, after having heard from everyone else, which again is not done by too many leaders, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think the root cause of this is just, I feel, in general, CEOs and upper management of most companies have become growingly detached to their working employees. Right. For example, if you have a company managing production, I find in most cases the CEO and top brass have never worked in the factory. They haven't seen the factories. They don't know what the experience is like. At the ground level of the people who are actually producing the product. Same thing in service industries, right? I don't think the CEO of a call center knows exactly what his or her employees go through, with every call that they take, and that is where I think there is this huge communication misgap, and also this lack of ownership. So I feel for any employee to feel totally connected to their employer and to truly want the best from their employer and to do their best for the employer, you need to give people a sense of accountability and a sense of ownership in the process, right? They need to feel like they are part of something much bigger than themselves. And when they see their top brass and CEOs who are just so completely out of touch to, what their everyday is like, it just makes it harder and harder for these people to find any semblance of joy or interest or passion in their work. Of course, there are people who are still passionate about their work because, the coworkers, of their managers, but in general, it sort of drives a culture of not laziness but apathy within the organization, where it's more like, I don't care what happens to the company, I don't care what happens to the CEO because the CEO doesn't care about me, right? Empathy is a two-way street, especially in any relationship, right? So I feel that is something that is important. You need to make your employees. You can't hoard all the power there, right? So if you give some of the power away to your employees, they feel like they're part of it. They have this sense of, okay, it needs to be good because I am part of this, and it is a reflection on me and my abilities, as well as a reflection on the company as a whole.
Sorry, it is also important that they get to enjoy the fruits of their labor as well. I mean, of course, they get their salary, beyond above and beyond the salary. If the organization as a whole is doing really well, then it is quite normal to expect the employees to uh, be uh, uh, be a part of the wealth as well, to be shared, the wealth to be shared with them as well. Whereas what's happening is that all the wealth is kind of being deployed to as bonuses to some of these executives, which kind of they draw multi-million dollar bonuses, and at the same time, if not that, or in addition to that, it is all being given away to investors in the form of dividends or in the form of share buybacks, and which doesn't necessarily benefit the average employee. And again, it only increases the disparity between the people who are rich, which are typically the investors in the organization or in the business, vis-a-vis the middle class or the working class, which is the employees in the organization. So when employees see that they are not being uh, uh, part of, they're not enjoying the wealth that they are creating, then it is quite obvious that they kind of switch off, and the entire um, quiet quitting movement takes hold, which is where people just come in, clock out, and then suddenly you find large organizations struggle with innovation, they struggle with creativity, they struggle with employee engagement, they struggle with employee retention, they struggle with employee motivation, and then all these sorts of issues crop up.
Yeah, so your customers are, of course, a priority, but your employees also need to be as big of a priority as your customers, right? So I forgot who said this. I think it was either the head of Marriott or the head of the Ritz. It was an interview, and this talk in the interview. This was right after Trump sort of released his statements on DEI, and how he wants to get rid of DEI and all these programs to help disparaged groups. And I don't again I don't remember who it was exactly, but they came out and very publicly they announced that their organization will not be doing any of that, and they believe that their strength lies in their diversity, and the sort of employee push that they saw in terms of this appreciation for the organization and the productivity spike. And it's just, yeah, it works. If you care about your employees, they will care about you. It's just as simple as that. And there's
Yeah,
a
true.
mountain of evidence to suggest this.
True, true, true. So now coming back to the power equation, right? So it is money and power is one side of the equation. Then there is the power dynamics between um, men and women in the society. So uh, do you think that is kind of, settled down, or do you still see there is power disparity between men and women in the society
Uh, I
in your
feel,
age group, maybe?
yeah, I think it really depends on where you are in the world, who you're hanging out with. For example, politically conservative or politically liberal, or there's a bunch of factors. There are certain areas or fields or industries where the disparity has sort of reversed, where women hold more power over men. For example, in elementary school teaching. For example, in nursing, right? These there have been multiple reports coming out of these industries of women holding much more power than men and misusing their power, right? But on the flip side, we cannot disagree that in certain other fields, men, I think in most fields, men still do have this sort of unconscious bias. There is this unconscious bias towards men in general across a lot of fields. Be it politics, be it business, be it anything corporate, be it construction, be it productions, be it filmmaking, be it entertainment, be it anything. So, in a vast majority of spaces, I would say men still hold more power over women. But in some niche cases, women do hold more power over men. In some cases, it's fairly equal. It really depends on the sort of specific area you've chosen to look at and understand.
Given the conversation we had around artificial intelligence and the technology sector, I read a report today which was released by Lovelace. It's called the Lovelace Report, released by VR Tech Women organization, and they say that there are hordes of women leaving the technology world simply because there is. Disparity in terms of growth opportunities, there is disparity in terms of pay, there is disparity in terms of respect for the work that they do, and that's a little sad because the power of artificial intelligence as a technology that's going to shape our the world that we're going to live in. And if there is a whole lot of women are getting out of that field, who's going to represent their perspective, and how is AI going to be um, non-divisive when it comes to men and women? And that creates its own set of problems from a power dynamics point of view.
Yeah, I feel in general I'm not really surprised at this. I think the IT sector and the technology sector in general has been sort of infamous for this not degradation, minimization of women's roles, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. Because if you really go and look at the roots of computer engineering and software design, the entire field exists because of women. They were the original programmers. They were the original coders, and I just think it's really a shame, and this deserves more pushback that women are being sort of pushed out of these fields. And I mean, there has been a long history in technology of women just not being represented, not just in technology but in STEM as a whole, which is why we have the whole women in STEM movement, which I think is very very important. Uh, and yes, you raised some very valid concerns about ethical dilemmas that these AIs can pose if they don't have enough input from women, not just from women, but also people of color, disparate groups, um, and any group that is sort of not creating this. And in general, if you look at the groups creating these AIs, for the most part, with the exception of maybe me, like DeepSeek, most of them are coming from the global north, right? And which is why I feel it's important for the global south to sort of invest in its own AI capabilities, so to make sure that their cultural norms, understandings, and requirements are also met by AI. And in the same way, I feel there should be a larger push for women to get involved in technology sector, not just in AI, but across the board. I feel, you know, gender-based discrimination in any field is just limiting innovation, limiting growth, and just limiting general, societal balances. I believe society does best when both women and men, and whatever gender may be, whichever gender you conform to, is able to live happily and freely, and instead of worrying about whether they're being discriminated against or stereotyped, or whether they're able to focus on really growing and becoming and creating better solutions and doing better and being better day after day.
So you spoke about this word freely, and that's something that I want to come back to, which is freedom to do what you want to do, freedom of choice, freedom of the ability to pursue what you want to pursue is so fundamental to all of us and to all our happiness, that anything that takes away that freedom, whether it is wealth, whether it is economic power, whether it is political power, whether it is uh, you know um, uh, moral power, whatever takes away that freedom is actually causing more problem in the long term than it is causing than it is benefiting in the short term. So I think that kind of brings us to kind of a close. Is there anything that you want to share as to kind of conclude this conversation?
Yeah. So while I do think wealth and power go hand in hand, no matter what field, but it's important to not equate power with being specifically tied to wealth and privilege, right? Power comes in many different forms. For example, if a wealthy individual has advisors around them who are maybe feeding into their decisions, their opinions, I believe they're just as powerful as the wealthy men themselves, right? So looking at power from this really small epistemic lens of being just solely connected to wealth, I think is doing it a disservice. Influence, for example, is a great motivator for power. You may not have money, but if you people listen to you and they like listening to you, you can bring tremendous amount of change. Look at religious leaders, for example. Religion holds immense power over people. I think belief is the core of our all power. For example, like wealth is a construct, right? Wealth doesn't truly exist. Money doesn't truly exist. We believe in its existence and we believe in its power, which is why it is able to wield that power. Same thing with religion, same thing with any belief. So it is concentration of belief that creates power, not wealth. Wealth is just a byproduct of it in our current economic system, and that's important to understand.
Super. Thank you so much, Ivan, and thank you so much, everyone, for listening and watching till the end. If you like our conversations, please do subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank
All right,
you.
thank you.
Until next time, take care. Bye bye.